This is the 9 o'clock news. Good evening. The shooting of Mr. Joseph Thief, the president of Marks & Spencer, a Palestine guerrilla group claims responsibility. They say he was a target because of his Zionist support. An American woman is held by police after guns and ammunition are found in her luggage at Heathrow Airport. The first day of Britain's 3-day week and the start of the layoffs, we look at how industry is being hit. Israel goes to the polls in her most vital election yet. We have a report from our special correspondent there.
The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine has claimed responsibility for the shooting of Mr. Joseph Thief, president of Marks & Spencer. Mr. Thief, whose condition is said to be satisfactory, is a leading member of the Jewish community in Britain. He's also a prominent fundraiser for the Zionist cause and recently visited Israel at the invitation of Mrs. Golda Meir. These activities led to last night's attack, as David McNeil reports from Beirut.
The PFLP says Mr. Thief was chosen as a target because he played an important role in the world Zionist movement, which in turn was an enemy of the Arab people. Mr. Thief, the spokesman said, had contributed to Israel's armaments industry, an act of direct aggression against Palestinians. And since the October War, he'd given more than £2 million to Israel. The spokesman said the PFLP had warned Mr. Thief as long ago as 1969, but the warning, in the form of a small bomb attack on a Marks & Spencer store in London, went unheeded. The guerrilla spokesman, Bassam Abu Sharif, who was himself badly disfigured by an Israeli letter bomb a few years ago, assured me that the main goal of the PFLP was to attack targets in Israel proper. But all Zionist and Israeli interests were legitimate targets, he said, and his organization would continue striking at them.
A hospital bulletin said that Mr. Thief's condition is rather better than expected. He's being kept in an intensive care unit after an operation to remove a bullet from his head, and his wife has been with him all day. Mr. Thief was shot at his home in St. John's Wood, London, by a masked man who forced his way past the butler. Police are trying to build up a photo-fit picture of the attacker from descriptions given by Mrs. Thief and the butler. From Mr. Thief's home, Michael Sullivan reports.
British Jews, particularly those in a position to put their influence and their money behind the Jewish cause in the Middle East, have long been aware that they're likely to be singled out for attack by Arab terrorist organizations. But in England, where even now the likelihood of such an attack seems so remote, it's very difficult to maintain the level of vigilance necessary to foil such a terrorist attack. Lord Janner, a member of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, today described Palestinian guerrilla attacks as vicious and bestial.
It just shows that they don't care a hang about anything at all, as long as they make themselves conspicuous. And of course, there's only one way of dealing with this kind of thing, and that is the international bodies throughout the world should take action to stop terrorism. It is not just started in 1969. I think it was the Black September people claimed responsibility for the bombs they put outside Marks & Spencer's before. And this has been going on for ever since that time and before that time. Well, now the world must waken up to the fact that they can't allow this kind of action to continue.
Sir John Cohen, founder of the Tesco store chain, said today that he had been warned about a so-called death list of prominent Jews. Sir John said a Jewish woman, whom he wouldn't name, had telephoned him to say that she was second on the list and he was third. He contacted the police immediately and they put a guard on his house. An American woman who was stopped by police at Heathrow Airport on Saturday when her luggage was found to contain arms and ammunition is still being questioned by police at Ealing. With her at the police station is a man she contacted in an airport bus. It's understood that the woman was spotted soon after her arrival from Los Angeles. She was allowed to pass through airport control points, but was detained after making her contact. Heavy security now surrounds Middle East flights while police continue their inquiries into the incident. And in Geneva, where the Middle East peace talks are being held, police found 6 packets containing explosives in lockers at the central railway station. The raid followed an anonymous telephone call giving the locker numbers, and police said the explosives were wrapped in paper which had what appeared to be Arabic lettering on it.
Britain began a 3-day working week today, and already more than 600,000 workers have been laid off. Most of the layoffs occurred in the Midlands and the Northwest. But because many factories would have been closed anyway for the New Year bank holiday tomorrow, the full effect of the government's measures won't be felt for some days. In the Midlands alone, more than 250,000 workers have been laid off, many of them in the car industry. A report from our Midlands correspondent, Peter Coburn.
British Leyland and the Midlands had 60,000 of their workers at home because of the power crisis. To control production on a 3-day week, they've set up an emergency control centre to allocate available components to factories that are working and arrange storage facilities for parts delivered when the assembly lines are closed.
Radiators, we've got some doubt about New Year's Day. MG appears to be going to work Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Swindon night shifts on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay, and unless they work in a 3-shift system.
In this one centre, they're controlling fuel and raw material for more than 100 factories throughout Britain. But much depends on the flow of parts from component makers.
We have 2,000 supplying companies, in excess of 2,000 supplying companies, and we are trying desperately hard to monitor what is happening to them to decide precisely what is likely to happen to us. And if you asked me in a sentence, what does this mean to the corporation, I would have to say that we're doing our damnedest to produce at least 65% or 70% of our programs. But this could be torpedoed by a crisis which may occur in any part of the country at any particular time.
In Scotland, industry will be at a virtual standstill for the whole of this week through a combination of the power crisis and the New Year holiday. And in the northwest of England, nearly 150,000 workers have been laid off today, many of them from the engineering industry. From Manchester, a report by Michael Delahaye.
1 in 8 of the 3.5 million workers in the northwest are in engineering. But today, only a handful, some 50,000, have actually been working. The reason is that most of the engineering companies here have been allocated Thursday, Friday and Saturday as their working days. And even those companies that are technically allowed to work today, many of them have decided to give their men the day off, rather than having to stop work again tomorrow for the public holiday. Ferrantes at Oldham were one of the very few big engineering concerns working normally today. They're at least fortunate in having been allocated the beginning of the week, unlike the majority who are going to have to pay their workers time and a half for working on Saturday. Meanwhile, diesel generators have helped out many of the smaller firms, enabling them to work a full 5 days and maintain near normal production. This firm at Stretford not only uses generators, but actually makes them. The director is Barry Quilliam.
Well, we'll be able to keep approximately 90% of the machinery going, and this means that with a bit of juggling about, we'll be able to keep all the men in work, working pretty well full-time.
And earning the same sort of wages?
Yes, more or less, I would say.
How long do you think you'll be able to keep going?
Well, we can keep going for a few weeks. The only thing that should stop us is if we start being held up for steel and other supplies from other manufacturers.
And what's the position in the steel industry? South Wales is a major centre of production, and from there our Welsh industrial correspondent Patrick Hannon sends this report.
The steel industry is one of the few that's been directly hit by the miners' overtime ban, because the supply of coal is an essential part of its production process. And although the power restrictions have forced the industry to cut back its use of electricity to 65%, the shortage of coal has already meant that steel production has been cut by a half. If the supply of coal ran out altogether, many works would be faced with the collapse of linings in blast furnaces and coke ovens, damage that would take months to repair. So the Steel Corporation is working on the assumption that the dispute might drag on for a long time, and it's eking out its precious coal stocks. Which means that it isn't just the prospect of a 3-day week that's hanging over many of these 65,000 steelworkers in Wales. Thousands of them may well be laid off altogether, something the Steel Corporation will be discussing with the unions later this week. And the implications of the problem don't end there either. The steel cutback is bound to have serious repercussions throughout the industrial world. Getting on for 2 million tons of steel a year goes from Wales to make motor cars. Considerably more than that goes to other engineering industries. All Britain's tin plate is made here in South Wales, and that's a vital raw material for things like the food packaging industry. And all this comes at a time when there's a world shortage of steel, when people have already been using up their stocks. So even if the crisis were to end tomorrow, industry would still be feeling the effects of this raw material shortage for some considerable time.
And now for the possible overall effects of the three-day week, our industrial correspondent Ian Ross.
The effects of a three-day week will be severe but not uniformly catastrophic. Many industries are completely exempt, and others, classified as continuous process, obliged to use a third less power. Some estimates put the number of workers who will be directly at risk from three-day working at no more than 7 million, out of a working population of 22 million. Short-time working will last at least as long as the miners' overtime ban, which is cutting down the supply of coal to the power stations. Now, it's the loss of upwards of 30% of coal production which remains the key factor, especially when, as now, less oil is being burnt at power stations. The amount of coal at the power stations at the moment amounts to about 12.5 million tons. But if the government hadn't acted as it has done, after, it must be said, much prompting from the electricity industry, this total would have been down to the danger level of 6 million tons by the end of next month. As it is, the experts say that we shall only manage to scrape through until April with three-day working and a further 10% saving from domestic users, unless, that is, coal production is back to normal long before then. These are figures which the government really haven't managed to get across to people, and figures which are disputed by the Labour Party, who see the three-day week as a stick with which to beat the miners. The Trade and Industry Minister, Mr. Peter Walker, who's been touring the Midlands today, was asked by Peter Colborne whether the three-day week was really necessary.
Well, it's not at all necessary if we get our full coal production. It is necessary if we're going to go on losing 30 and perhaps even rising to 40% of our coal production from the mines. At the beginning of this year, we had the biggest coal stock we'd had for many years, and I'd spent most of the summer stocking up with coal, fortunately. But alas, with coal production running at 70% of its normal levels, week by week, these stocks have gone down. And unless we had acted now, by the middle of January, we would have had indiscriminate fuel cuts, and by February, a total breakdown of British industry.
The miners' leader is accusing the government of panicking over the three-day week.
Well, I suppose the miners' leader might see some advantage in the government not taking these measures and reaching a situation in a few weeks' time when the government was faced with a total and complete breakdown of British industry, or to make a settlement with the miners beyond stage 3. And perhaps he felt that would be to his advantage, but I'm sure it would have been to the national disadvantage. It is a tragedy that at this time, when the British order books are so full, when British people working in factories could be enjoying overtime and marvellously increased earnings each week, that we should be faced with this problem. And it's very much a case, I believe, of the miners having to recognise that they've had a very generous offer, they should accept this and help the nation recover from the present crisis.
Mr. Walker's opposite number on the Labour benches, Mr. Tony Benn, doesn't accept this as the true situation. He maintains that the government has refused to answer all the points he raised in a letter to the Prime Minister at the weekend. After Mr. Walker's statement today, I asked Mr. Benn whether he was satisfied now.
Oh, certainly not. I think the three-day week should be called off at once. No facts have been made available. We've had speeches by ministers. We've even had Mr. Pryor talking about sewage in the streets. But I put 6 very basic questions to the Prime Minister on Saturday. I rang number 10 Downing Street today. The answers are not available. And I'm absolutely certain that this is a politically motivated decision and is not justified by the coal stocks, which are higher than they were last year.
Surely by indicting the government, you're also indicting the electricity industry and the CBI, who both have defended the government's move.
There was no consultation with the TUC or the CBI before the decision was taken. The cost of the three-day week is going to run to about £40 million a week on social security payments alone, possibly £500 million a week in loss of production. There's been no attempt to protect people from the effects of this, those with mortgage payments, hire purchase payments. No provision has been made to protect exporters who may be adversely affected because they can't meet their guaranteed delivery dates. I say very reluctantly, and I'm still awaiting the facts, that the government, in my view, are using this quite deliberately in order to try to put the blame for a much deeper problem that faces Britain upon the miners. It isn't justified, it isn't fair, and the facts upon which it's based have never been made public.
Next Wednesday sees yet another meeting between the miners' leaders and the coal board to try and scrape a bit more out of the Phase 3 pay regulations, with the approval of the pay board, of course. Even if agreed, what it will add to the pay offer doesn't seem enough to win over the union's executive, or even get them to hold a pithead ballot. And consequently, if there is no end to the overtime ban in sight, there will be no early resumption of full-time working in industry, for it must be faced, the two are unavoidably interconnected.
Well, Mr. Walker, the Industry Secretary, did have some positive announcements on his visit to the Midlands. He said there'll be a major investment programme for power stations in 1974, and a rich new coal seam in Yorkshire is to be developed. He also said he was organising a major exports drive in the Middle East, starting with Iran. A Conservative MP has called on Mr. Walker to impose restricted opening hours on cinemas, ice rinks and bingo halls. In a letter to the Minister, Mr. Robert Adeley, the member for Bristol North East, said the brunt of the present restrictions seem to be borne by shopkeepers. They'll become increasingly restless, he added, if others who supply a service are not similarly limited.
In Israel, troops have stayed on full alert throughout the day as the country went to the polls in what's seen as the most crucial election in Israel's history. By tonight, more than 70% of the voting population had cast their ballots. A report from David Sells.
For Mrs. Golda Meir and her Labour alignment, this has been a nervous election. No Israeli election either has been so critical for the country's future. The dominating theme has been that of peace with security, and which party stands the best chance of providing them. Mrs. Meir and her cabinet have been under attack for blunders which allowed Israel to be caught napping in October by the Egyptian and Syrian armies. And in particular, that old Israeli folk hero, General Dayan, has been blamed as Minister of Defense responsible. Most Israeli politicians confess that today's poll could go any way. Dayan at the ballot box, though, was still optimistic. The challenger to Labour is Likud, whose leader, Menachem Begin, the former Irgun terrorist commander, is expected to scoop up more seats in the new Israeli parliament, the Knesset. Begin is hawkish on the Geneva talks and return of occupied Arab territories. His aim is to dominate a national coalition government. Something like 80% of Israel's 2 million voters will have visited polling stations by 11 o'clock tonight, soldiers included. And wounded soldiers as well. The army vote, with heavy mobilization still needed, could swing the election. Polling took place not only at military hospitals, but in frontline positions as well. 1,500 military polling stations, many of them mobile, were set up. About 1 in 12 of Israeli voters is non-Jewish. Most are Arabs who have a handful of their own candidates in the main lists, plus 4 groups of their own. All voting today was for party lists under Israel's proportional system. And here in East Jerusalem, voting by the Arab population was exclusively for the city council, because the majority are still Jordanian citizens.
In Northern Ireland, a soldier's been killed by a sniper who fired into the back of an armoured vehicle patrolling the Falls Road district of Belfast. A second soldier was hit, but not seriously injured, by the same bullet. The soldier who died was Guardsman Alan Daughtery from Durham. He was a married man with 2 children. Police investigating last week's Belfast kidnapping of West German industrialist Thomas Niedermeyer have received details of a telephone call saying he's alive. The call was made to the Grundig Works, where Herr Niedermeyer is managing director. Police are still trying to establish whether the call was authentic. After 21 months of direct rule, the Ulster executive takes over at midnight. The 15 members were sworn in today at Stormont and presented with their seals of office by the new Secretary for Ulster, Mr. Francis Pym.
Mr. Faulkner, Chief Executive Member. Mr. Fitt, Deputy Chief Executive Member.
new method of government in Northern Ireland is the freely declared choice of the people of Northern Ireland. And for that reason alone, it deserves the full support of everyone in Northern Ireland, even from those who are against this or any other new arrangement.
The 7 Chileans whose request for political asylum in Britain was turned down by the Home Secretary last week have been granted a temporary injunction preventing their deportation. They are to be allowed to remain here so they can have an opportunity to present their case in full in the High Court on Wednesday.
The MCC team met at Lord's today for lunch and a pre-tour meeting before they leave for the West Indies next week. Taking advantage of the occasion was Jackie Birkinshaw, who has a benefit season next year. He persuaded teammates to sign cricket bats. Michael Blakey, our sports correspondent, put it to their new captain, Mike Durness, that few people thought they had a chance of winning.
I think that's true. It's been in the papers that because England had an unsuccessful time last summer that we're going out as the underdogs. But that's not a bad thing, you know, because if you go out as the underdogs, everything you do must be towards success, and that's what we'll be trying to do out there.
What would you say are the main strengths of the touring side?
Our touring side? Well, I think it's an all-round touring side, really. I think we've got fine batsmen who are all capable of getting a lot of runs, and quickly too, which I think is a good thing. They're attacking players. We've got a well-balanced attack, both from the quick bowlers and from the spin attack. And generally, I think they're a great bunch of boys, and we're just looking forward to getting them all together and having a happy tour and a successful one, we hope.
Football and Crystal Palace, in danger of being relegated for the second successive season, have given their manager Malcolm Allison wholehearted support. The Palace chairman said just before the club's annual general meeting tonight that the board were behind Allison all the way. There would certainly be no ultimatums.
The main points of the news again. Sir Joseph Seif, president of Marks & Spencer, was shot because of his Zionist support, say Palestine guerrillas who claim responsibility. His condition is said to be satisfactory. At Ealing Police Station, an American woman is being questioned tonight after guns and ammunition were found in her luggage at Heathrow Airport. The 3-day working week began today, and already more than 600,000 workers have been laid off. Well, that's the way it is tonight. The news will be back as usual tomorrow, but for me this last day of the old year is my last news. Today I retire from the BBC staff. I first read the news, you know, nearly 40 years ago, and that was to the countries of the old British Empire. And I've been doing that, or reporting, ever since, except when I was in the Navy during the war. And as you know, I've been on BBC television news almost since it began nearly 20 years ago. Well, amongst other things, I'm now looking forward to joining the Nationwide programme, doing films about nature, so I won't be entirely on your side of the screen just yet. So it's good night now, despite the rather gloomy news, and may I wish a happy new year to you all, and thank you and the BBC for those 40 stimulating years.
Now the continuing story of the weather. Tonight in England and Wales, fog patches will become more widespread and dense in many places. Frost will be widespread too, and will lead to icy patches on roads. Tomorrow, maximum temperatures will be similar to today's, ranging from 8 centigrade 46 Fahrenheit in Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland, to as low as 3 centigrade 37 Fahrenheit in the Midlands and southeast England.
And now here's a police message concerning drugs which were lost in Fife yesterday. During the forenoon, 85 milligram Valium tablets, yellow in colour, contained in a medium-sized brown glass bottle, were lost in the area of Cooper or Fruchy. These tablets are dangerous if taken in excess by adults or if consumed at all by children. Will any person having any information about these tablets please contact the Fife Constabulary Police Headquarters, telephone number Kirkcaldy 52611. Telephone number again, Kirkcaldy 52611, or any police office.